لله تعالى نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا ومن يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله. Indeed, all the praise is due to Allah. We seek Allah's help and forgiveness. We seek refuge with Allah, the exalted, from the evil in our soul and from our bad deeds. Whomsoever Allah Azza wa Jal, the exalted, guides, they will never be led astray, and whomsoever Allah leads astray, no one will be able to guide them. I bear witness that there is no God, there is no deity worthy of worship except Allah, the One, having no partners, and I bear witness that Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam is Allah's final slave and messenger. يا أيها الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله حق تقاته ولا تموتن إلا وأنتم مسلمون. O you who have believed, fear Allah as Allah alone should be feared, and do not die except as Muslims in submission to Allah. يا أيها الناس اتقوا ربكم الذي خلقكم من نفس واحدة وخلق منها زوجها وبث منهما رجالا كثيرا ونساء واتقوا الله الذي تساءلون به والأرحام إن الله كان عليكم رقيبا. O people, be dutiful to your Lord, who created you from one soul and created from it its mate and dispersed from both of them many men and women. And fear Allah, through whom you demand mutual rights, and revere the wombs that bore you. Indeed, Allah is ever ar-Raqib, an observer over you. يا أيها الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله وقولوا قولا سديدا يصلح لكم أعمالكم ويغفر لكم ذنوبكم ومن يطع الله ورسوله فقد فاز فوزا عظيما. O you who have believed, fear Allah and speak words of appropriate justice. Allah will then amend for you your deeds and forgive you your sins. And whoever obeys Allah and Allah's messenger has certainly attained the greatest attainment. I'm about to proceed. So, as we continue in our efforts to elevate our ranks as seekers of the divine in pursuit of the alchemy of happiness, we are looking at the role of cognition and perception and how that defines who we are and where we came from. We looked at the elements in that respect, and now we are beginning to move inwardly and to examine how this all beautifully works together in a unified way. So last Sunday, we talked about how the 5 external senses, seeing, hearing, tasting, touching, and smelling, how they create events and experience which create a stimulus or affect. So we see something, it affects us in a certain way. It actually changes our state in many respects, and then we behave a certain way. But before all of that happens, we are actually recording images that we see. We are making these decisions without particular guidance oftentimes. We are making these decisions based on our ego or our delusional brain. The basic perception of a thing, an experience that we have, or an event causes us to make a decision, an impression, representations, perceptions, or rationalities. Now, without particular guidance, making decisions is very dangerous. And I have sort of taken some liberties with the word decision in the sense that D comes from Deo, which means God, and cision comes from the root side, decide, suicide, homicide, herbicide, pesticide, anything that kills. So when we make a decision that is not based on the Quran and the Sunnah, we kill the God in us. And so the universe, though, has been fashioned by Allah Azza wa Jal, Allah the Exalted, in a way that may become a source of spiritual inspiration for us. Remember that Allah will show us the signs on the universe and the signs within ourselves. So the external and the internal. We talked about last week how that meditation and contemplation are essential for developing our soul and spirituality. In order to experience ruh, kashua, the spirit, the essence of a thing, you must first know about the thing. So if I tell you about the beautiful aroma of frankincense or peppermint or some aroma that you might like, you will experience it experientially when I open the bottle and then you smell it. I want to remind myself and you that in Islam, meditation is not a state of silence. In the Western world, predominantly meditation is a state of silence. But in fact, it is a deep kind of contemplative thinking process. It is an elevated kind of contemplation that takes us from the seen world to the unseen world, from darkness to light, from darkness to illumination, from chaos to conviction, from limitation to limitlessness, from word to meaning, from word to meaning to application. So this meditation, this tadabbur, and this tafakkur is a door through which we can enter another world, not the temporal world that we live in, but the I.S.L.A.M, the unseen world. And since it is in the articles of faith of a Muslim that we believe in the unseen, then certainly we should know a lot about it. It is an article of faith. Particular knowledge, meaning that knowledge which comes from the criterion, that haqq, that truth that comes from none other than Allah Azza wa Jal, is spiritual power. So the Western world says that knowledge is power. Particular knowledge is spiritual power, and that particular knowledge again would be the knowledge from the Quran or the Sunnah, and it's spiritual power only when it's implemented, activated, and experienced. So this intellectual process has two different directions. It has the al-aql, the soul, and the al-anfus, which is the soul, and the al-afaq, which is the external world. So this takes us back to what we've often focused on, the alam al-ghayb and the alam al-shahada, and the heart in the middle. Does my heart lean toward the alam al-ghayb, the unseen, my Lord, or does it lean to that which I see in the world? When a believer sees the universe functioning in a perfect manner, confident that Allah Azza wa Jal is the Lord of all the worlds, then they will find that every single event, that all the events in this vast universe always proceed towards a meaningful result. I call it GPS, God's planning system. You will know with certitude that whatever happens, it's God's plan. Your ego may not like it. But if you have this level of contemplation, you will know that everything is in the GPS. It's already programmed. You don't have to put in the address or where you want to go. Allah has already done that. Allah Azza wa Jal created nothing, not one experience, not one moment in time in vain. There is nothing mysterious about spirituality in Islam. It is the direct result of the kind of intellectual development that takes place when a believer ponders over the Creator and the Creator's creation, and it is through this that they gain spirituality in the process. Pew Research did an article with COVID. I'm a little mixed up on dates. I think it was about 2 years ago, and they talked about what a large percentage of people in the world claim to be spiritual. That kind of spirituality is ego-based. I think this, I believe this, and so that's how I'm spiritual. But the real spirituality has a vertical relationship. It is head to heart. The source of Islamic spirituality and elevation of our ranks as seekers of the divine is observation and reflection, not some sort of mysterious exercise in a banality. So I'm reminded that the universe becomes a permanent source of spiritual inspiration for learning for believers, every single thing that happens in it. Islam does not advocate withdrawing from the world. We must live in this world and participate in its activities. How will we do da'wah? How will we invite otherwise? What is desired from us is that while fulfilling our duties to Allah, Azza wa Jal, exalted is Allah, we protect our hearts from being attached to worldly affairs. Through this, we will continue to gain spiritually and elevate our ranks as seekers of the divine in pursuit of the alchemy of happiness. So today's class continues to examine within the development of the animal soul, our sense of perception begins to operate and distinguish images from objects in reality. Now, what does that mean? Perception as a function of animals consists of 5 external and 5 internal sensible and psychic senses. So you could say we have 11 senses. We have 5 internal, 5 external, and the psychic or spiritual sense, the soul sense. So the 5 external senses, again, are the ability to see, hear, or become aware of something through the senses. So the external senses is sensible. I sensed it through my senses. So they are the ability to see, hear, or become aware of something through the senses. It is a subjective, active, and creative process through which we assign meaning to sensory information. I put my hand over a hot stove and I learn that that heat can be uncomfortable. I look at something and I sense something on the outside through the senses, and later on we'll talk about what happens internally. So we assign meaning to sensory information. Now let's process that a minute, because as children, when the frontal lobe, the amygdala, is not fully developed, and we are actually processing information and maybe not being guided because maybe both parents are working and nobody's around and we're just latchkey kids coming home from school, playing Nintendo, playing games, watching television, and nobody to guide us. So this subjective, active, creative process through which we assign meaning to sensory information is done to understand ourselves and others. It is important in understanding the human behavior because every person perceives the world and approaches life's challenges differently. There are 7 to 8 billion humans on the earth, and there are 7 to 8 billion different opinions. These external senses are each capable of a basic perception of things that are actually presented or present to the external sense organ. That which I can see, that which I can hear, that which I can taste, that which I can touch, that which I can smell. Their perception, however, is based on a single kind of impression, an idea, feeling, or opinion about something or someone, especially one formed without conscious thought or on the basis of evidence. And when I talk about evidence, I'm talking about the evidence from the Quran and the Sunnah. I think, therefore it is. That's not how we as Muslims live. That's how people of ego live. The thought from what we experience through the senses evokes a feeling, a sense, a fancy, an inkling, or suspicion that is followed by behavior. And typically it is ego-oriented, either to gain pleasure from my ego or to avoid pain. So these 5 inner senses are the abilities to have common sense, imagination, representation, rational perception, and memory. And inshallah, we will look at each of these. Just talk about common sense for a moment. We hear a lot of people say, oh, he's very intelligent, but he has no common sense. We hear people say things like that. So common sense is defined as sound practical judgment concerning everyday matters, or a basic ability to perceive, understand, and judge in a manner that is shared by most people. Now, wisdom, on the other hand, is the application of knowledge. It's knowledge applied. It means the ability to reach intelligent conclusions. Sense implies a reliable ability to judge and decide with soundness, prudence, and intelligence. A choice showing good sense, common sense, suggests an average degree of such ability without sophistication or special knowledge. So all perception, whether you're a believer or a non-believer, involves signals, sensations, and state effect or affect through the nervous system that result in physical or chemical stimulation. So I perceive something that my ego likes, and I suddenly can have a chemical release in my brain, and that chemical release might make me feel good. Therefore, I will make a decision that I will do that activity over and over and over again. And one of those examples would be pornography. What is released in the brain when people look at pornography is the same chemical that would be released if you sucked on a crack cocaine pipe. This is how powerful the understanding of this is. Now, Imam Ghazali tells us that the first internal sense is actually common sense. He says that it is the storehouse for all impressions, ideas, feelings, or opinions about something or someone, especially impressions formed without conscious thought or on the basis of evidence from the outer world. It directly receives the contents of the 5 external senses. So you could just sort of say raw experience. Remember the apple story that I shared last week? The apple is perceived through common sense. We distinguish the different states of the apple and realize that every part of the apple possesses taste. The skin tastes different than the meat of the apple, and the meat of the apple tastes different than the seeds of the apple, and the seeds of the apple taste different than the stem of the apple. So the apple possesses taste, smell, each part of it, colors, warmth, or cold, temperature. And all of this we record in the brain, and we keep adding to it. There are 4 functions connected to common sense. Imam Ghazali says the first one is to receive an impression, idea, feeling, or opinion devoid of conscious thought with no evidence. This happens and I sense it. I experience it through a sense, one of my senses. And then to act on it as the arbiter of reports from the 5 external senses. So I begin to make comparisons. The third step is to transmit to a more inward sense, which is to contemplate what I have observed, how it compares maybe to something else, And the fourth one is to reduce, when I'm making that comparison, contrary or false impressions. Well, this can't be so because of this, and that can't be so because of that. So several impressions can come, and if we don't have the amygdala developed, it can be very confusing to us. Because it can also come from different senses. Well, I saw it this way, but I felt it this way. I heard it this way, but I saw it this way. So it is about stimuli, state, processing, and action. We perceive, we orient ourselves based on our perception, and then we act. So the five senses, to simplify it, include common sense, representation, imagination. So the sensible is sensus learning with the five senses. The rational is the cognitive learning, the rational process, and then we have memory and or recall. We'll talk more about each of these. So regarding the cognitive system and common sense, after we receive an impression, attribute what has been received from the five external senses, the stimuli, internalize that experience, again reducing the contrary images to the unity of perception, whereby false impressions are destroyed. We move to the second of the internal senses of creating representation. A creation that is a visual or tangible rendering, a recording or a symbol. So we learn the word family cognitively. Then we say, well, what does that mean to me? And it means whatever I experience, which is different to everyone else. All of our families look different. They have different rituals of connection. So we have these recorded symbols. Now, what's very interesting is here's where that 11th sense comes in. The natural man or woman receiveth not the things of the Spirit, for they are foolishness to him or her. It's just however I want to think. I'm an intelligent person. People will say, I don't need anyone to tell me what to do. And this is their approach. Although common sense, representation, and sensible imagination are held in common by animals and us, there are differences, and why? There are differences because of the human's capacity for rationality. You see, the animals do not rationalize. They have an instinct. They operate according to their instinct, and that's what they do. They don't rebel on that. But we have freedom of will. So let me say it again. Although common sense, representation, and sensible imagination are held in common by animals and us, there are differences because of the human's capacity for rationality, reason. So we have the rational versus the sensitive stimuli and internal sense. As adjectives, the difference between rational and sensible is that rational is capable of reasoning, internal, up here in the brain, while sensible is perceptible by the senses, external. So representation receives images that have been received and sorted by the common sense. Its main function within the self, Allah has a reason for everything, is to continue the thought process, to recommend important forms to the deliberation of rational imagination, and then to store them in memory. It retains impressions longer, these impressions that are in the memory, than common sense does, and tries them in the balance. So common sense does not tend to store those things at the same level. The basic perception of a thing, experience, or event causes us to make decisions, impressions, representations, perceptions, or rationalities. And the universe has been fashioned by Allah Azza wa Jal in a way that may become a source of spiritual inspiration for us. Tawassum is the ability to understand the signs of Allah in nature. Meditation and contemplation are essential for developing our soul and spirituality. Let's look at this vertical relationship again, Allah to head, head to heart. And let's look at it in terms of the Shahada. We say it, and then we become convicted. Our hearts become confident about it. Oftentimes, when a revert or convert is pronouncing a testimony of Shahada, they may not know really experientially, they don't know experientially what they're really saying. One should know and understand the Shahada so well that the main purpose behind the utterance is that he or she believes in his or her heart that there is no God worshipped but Allah Azza wa Jal alone. And this is from I.S.L.A.M. The second condition, there's 7 conditions to Shahada, is that his or her heart is very confident with the word Tawheed. The word of Allah says the believers are those who believe in God and his messenger, that have not doubted and have struggled with their possessions and themselves in the way of Allah. They are the truthful ones. And this is in Surah Al-Hujurat, verse 15. The first expression is the words, Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah wa ashhadu anna Muhammadan abduhu rasuluh. The second part is to establish or confirm that Allah alone is entitled to be worshipped. And then the third condition is sincerity. Anyone who is not sincere in all the conditions of Shahada actually belongs to the people of Shirk. The Quran says in Surah Zumar, verse 11, say, O Muhammad, indeed, I have been commanded to worship Allah, being sincere to Allah in religion. Similarly, the Prophet ﷺ said, the happiest man, woman, with my intercession on the day of judgment is the person who utters the words of Shahada sincerely from the bottom of his or her heart. So we just can't have these words appear. There must be this head-heart relationship. The fourth condition of the Shahada is to carry out the claims of the word Tawheed that has been said in everyday life. The Munafiqun only pronounces the Shahada verbally, but they do not follow with their hearts and deeds. And the Quran talks about these people. They say that they are Muslims, but faith has not yet entered into their hearts. Thus, their expression is considered a lie because there is a contradiction between the exterior and the interior. The Holy Quran says in Surah Al-Ankabut, verse 3, but we have certainly tried those before them, and Allah will surely make evident those who are sincere, those who are truthful, and Allah will surely make evident the liars, the hypocrites. Similarly, the Prophet ﷺ said, no one who speaks the 2 words of Shahada is really from the bottom of his heart, unless Allah forbids him or her the fire of the hell. And this is from Bukhari. So the fruit of conviction is to love Allah and to love Islam. O you who believe, who wish to reach Allah, whoever from among you turns back from his or her religion, then Allah Azza wa Jal will bring a people whom he loves and who love him. So we have to love Allah more than we love ourselves, and that is part and parcel of our Shahada. This is something we must learn and something we must implement in order to achieve the alchemy of happiness and in order to elevate our ranks as seekers of the divine. This condition is to follow it in our hearts and minds. That is to practice all the instructions and leave all of the prohibitions. The essence of Islam is surrender, submission, bowing heart and body to Allah. And whoever submits, from Surah Luqman, verse 22, and whoever submits his or her face, and this word in Arabic is wajah. It's a beautiful word because it's whoever submits their countenance, their essence, their personality. Face, wajah means also personality, to Allah. They surrender their personality to Allah, not their ego. He or she is a doer of good, then he or she has grasped the most trustworthy handhold. Surah Luqman, verse 22. So the second requirement of the Shahada is to accept it. Some people pronounce the words and know their meanings, but do not accept them when invited. Those of you who are on this class today accepted the invitation and are struggling with your might and main, with your living and your dying, to materialize and realize and internalize this religion. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala narrates in the Quran that this is the attitude of disbelievers that I mentioned. Indeed, they, the disbelievers, when it is said to them, there is no deity but Allah, were arrogant. And they said, are we going to abandon our alihah, gods, for the sake of a mad poet? And this is in Surah Al-Safat, verses 35 and 36. So you see, these folks are going to obey their egos, what they were told that isn't part of particular guidance, and therefore they will be lost. The source of Islamic spirituality and elevation of our ranks as seekers of the divine is through observation and reflection. Observation of what happens with our senses and the reflection that we do in our head and our heart. Do we do it based on our ego, or do we do it based on particular guidance? And again, this is not done by some mysterious exercise in a banana tree. Islam does not advocate withdrawing from the world. Again, we must live in the world and participate in its activities. Today, I want to continue to examine within the development of the animal soul how our sense of perception begins to operate to distinguish images from objects in reality. Again, I will remind myself and you that perception is a function of animals that consist of 5 external and internal sensible and psychic senses. Now you might say, well, what is the difference between images and objects in reality? The difference in terms of a noun between an object and an image is that an object is a thing that has a physical existence, while an image is an optical or other abstract representation or symbol of a real object or thing we have experienced, a graphic or a picture. For those of you who might have been involved in psychodynamic therapy, schemas are the product of recorded sensations abstract things, not physical things, abstract experiences that we had, perhaps when someone hurt us or whatever. The 5 external senses, again, are the ability to see, hear, taste, touch, and smell. These external senses are each capable of a basic perception of things that are actually presented to them. Their perception is based on a single kind of impression. These impressions become an idea, a feeling, or opinion about something or someone formed without conscious thought, again on the basis of little evidence. Perception is a subjective, active, and creative process through which we become aware of something through the senses and assign meaning to the sensory information to understand ourselves and others. It is our recognition and interpretation of sensory information, and it can include how we respond to the information. Perception not only creates our experience of the world around us, it allows us to act within our environment. Perception is the process by which individuals organize and interpret their sensory impressions to give meaning to their environments. All perception involves signals, sensations, and state effects in the nervous system. And often we make our opinions on a matter based on what we feel, what we experienced, which in turn results in or from physical or chemical stimulation again in the brain. Perception is not this passive receipt of these signals, but is shared by learning, memory, expectations, and attention. The study of these perceptual processes show that their functioning is affected by 3 classes of variables. The objects or events that we are perceiving, the environment in which it occurs, who is there when it occurs, and the individual who perceives it. A lot is going on. Perception is very important in understanding human behavior because, again, every person perceives the world and approaches life's problems differently. People's behavior is based on their perceptions of what reality is, not on reality itself. So as a therapist, people will come in and tell me a narrative, and then I'll say, but what is? That's your subjective reality, but what is what I see in the mirror is, and then we become to more of an accurate perception when we're deluded. So the thought from what we experience through the senses evokes a feeling, a sense, a fancy, an inkling toward a thing or suspicion that is followed by a behavior. Impressions produce affect and effect. They affect us and they change how we feel. They actually can produce change in us. So it is about stimuli, state, processing, and action. We perceive, orient, and act. A little bit deeper into the idea of perception, because it is of 3 types: sensible, psychic, and cognitive or rational. So I can sense it and make a decision based on what happens with my 5 senses. I can just use my brain, which will delude me. It'll see water in a desert that's not there, and I'll die of starvation going to that water. And then I have that psychic piece. That's my connection to Allah. Psychic and cognitive perception can be possessed as well through the internal senses alone. So we're moving now from the outside to the inside. I wanted to sort of review and make sure we're clear about this. Although common sense, representation, and sensible imagination are held in common by animals and us, again, there are differences because of rationality. Representation receives images that have been received and sorted by common sense, and its main function within the self is to continue the thought process, to recommend important forms to the deliberation of rational imagination, and to store them in memory. Imagination, while being referred to as sensible imagination in animals, imagination forms the basis of physical perception. Sensible perception is particular, imagination is general. And this is why imagination can actually be so dangerous. Because we can go wild with our imagination and be way out there in some abstract land. And that will then culminate in cognitive rational perception, which can get us in trouble. Some people get lost in their imaginations instead of in hawk. In general, and it accumulates in cognitive or rational perception, so that it is the intermediary between the sensible and the rational. Oh, I imagine this, I imagine that. Well, what does Allah tell us? It is active while we are both awake and asleep. And it is the cause of dreams. Oftentimes, when we are dreaming, we are actually warring. We're trying to work something out on the outside and we can't work it out. So we go inside in our sleep and we're having war with this thing. And we'll recognize it in our dream. What does the symbol of that dream mean? It is active while we are both awake and asleep and is the cause of dreams. It can operate out of either the immediate experience of intuition or out of the deliberation of reason. As soon as the rational sense makes distinctions of universal meanings and presents them to our sense of reason to look more closely into them through the insight of our ability to reason, our sense of reason looks at them through the image which the imaginative sense represents. Then our sense of reason or rational sense distinguishes whether the image is perfect or not perfect, common or not perfect. It thinks immediately of the intelligible meanings. This is the way that universal meanings are understood by artists and scientists. When the artist thinks of how to make an object, he or she presents the image of the particular article to his or her imagination and prepares his or her plan to make it. Similarly, when a science investigates the object of knowledge to know its nature and give its description, he or she presents its image to his or her imagination. So these are mental pictures, representations that we make decisions about. Imagination writes in memory impressions of things received by the external senses as well as by reason, in addition to things it composes itself. It is like a person who writes him or herself a note to remind him or herself of something, and later reads the note and mentally adds something from his or her mind at that moment to the note. So I'm in the present, in the here and now, having an experience. I write about it, and then I reflect and I bring some stuff out of my mind about it. Later, imagination may return to the forms and activate them without the intervention of the external senses, because it's stored in the long-term memory in the brain. In this case, it is activated by the affective or behavioral system attracting us to pleasure or avoiding harm. It has also been noted that imagination is more likely to follow the senses than to follow reason. Once the senses are satisfied, imagination is free to busy itself with other forms. Imagination is never idle. It often leads us to confusion. Perhaps that's why when I was growing up, my grandmother used to say, son, idle mind is the devil's workshop. Because when you're idle and your mind is just running rampant, ruminating about all of the negativity or whatever it's doing, we just keep adding and rationalizing and intellectualizing. Well, it was because of this. Well, it's just. That means I'm now justifying. So we keep adding to justifying, rationalizing, and intellectualizing instead of spiritualizing. The call is to charge, is to change. The charge is to change. And rather than react, respond according to particular knowledge. Respond according to the Quran and the Sunnah. You see, Satan presents thoughts to us, images, and we ruminate about them. I've taught classes about thought, the role of thought in the believer. The waswas or khannas comes like a fox, repeating these things, and then he retreats with a happy smile on his face like a little fox. And then he comes back and he tempts you again. And you start worrying and you let your imagination go wild about the worst possible things that could happen instead of saying, I believe in the call of Allah, and whatever happens is going to be from Allah. Alhamdulillah. So we need to be aware that when these thoughts are presented to us and these thoughts don't align themselves with the Quran and the Sunnah, we come into the here and now and we experience what Allah has for us. So inshallah, Allah will make us among those who study and understand the role of thought in Islam, who study and understand how we are supposed to process information from our senses, that we will understand how Allah has given 7 conditions to the Shahada that help illuminate our understanding of this. So I pray that we will be among those who have the particular knowledge, that we will be among those that have the particular knowledge to elevate our ranks, that we will be reminded that in a month, less than a month actually, I believe it's the 2nd of February will be the month of Rajab. And so I'd like each person to go to the chat, every single student, and tell me if you want me to continue with this, or you want me to go and do the boot camp, which it's all the same thing, it's just a different way of saying it, on preparing you of the virtues of Rajab, the virtues of Sha'ban. We have 60, not quite 60 now, well, we have more than that, sorry. But we need to start preparing and understanding in Rajab and Sha'ban what we want to do for the month of Ramadan, inshallah. So I'd like each person to go to the chat and say, I would like you to shift and begin to talk to us about the sacred months and what we should do before Ramadan, or we can continue in this and cover that during Ramadan, as many of you have been through this before. But every year, it is vital that you understand the ruh, the essence of fasting, what you do to actually attain taqwa. Not what you do to get every delicacy that you can eat. That's not the purpose of Ramadan. Really, the purpose of Ramadan is to elevate your ranks, to be in the pursuit of this spiritual happiness. So I beg each of you to give me feedback, and you can just put in the chat, each one of you, boot camp to Ramadan, alchemy of happiness. And then I will look at the majority, and I have 3 responses or 2 responses. I'd like to have one from everybody, so that I would be able to feed you and to serve you as a servant of Allah, that which you feel is most beneficial to you spiritually. Subhanaka Allahumma wa bihamdika ashhadu an la ilaha illa ant astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk. I love you all for the sake of Allah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.